This is the Nile River, the river that defines Africa and especially the nation where it ends, Egypt. And it's where our story comes from today. The story today comes from the first two chapters of Exodus. And the setting is after the death of Joseph, the great grandson of Abraham, the patriarch of the Hebrew people. Joseph had been the prime minister of Egypt and had guided the Egyptians and their king through a terrible time of famine and economic disruption. But he died, and a new king has arisen, probably a new dynasty. He neither knew nor cared about the past and about the relationships that had created the great nation of Egypt as it stood. And he felt threatened by this group of immigrants among the Egyptian people, sure that their different culture and their language and their religious traditions would undermine Egypt. And so he engaged in a program of oppression, first enslaving the Israelites and taking away all of their rights, and second, putting them to work in the most horrendous of conditions. And yet, it seems the Hebrews kept right on with their lives. They reproduced an alarming rate, according to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians became fearful that they would shortly outnumber them. And so he gave orders to the midwives who delivered the children of the Hebrews to kill every male child. But the midwives, whose sympathy was with the children being born and their mothers, preserved all the children, using the excuse that by the time they got there, their mothers had already given birth. And so Pharaoh gave a command that every time there was a male child among the Hebrews that they discovered, they were to throw it into the Nile. Now it seems that among the Hebrews was a young man from the tribe that would later become the priestly tribe of the Hebrews. And he and his wife had a child who is not named, and neither are they. The child is 3 months old, and they've been hiding him successfully, and they can't hide him anymore. He's too big, and he cries like babies do. And so they make a little basket, an ark, it says in the Hebrew, and put it in the reedy muck along the side of the river, right where the king's daughter comes to bathe every day. And sure enough, she sees the basket. And a few yards away, hidden in the reeds, is the child's sister. We'll hear more about her later in the Genesis and Exodus stories. Well, she said she knew a woman who was nursing, and she would be happy to bring that woman to the princess, and so she does. And the princess raises this child as her own and names him Moses, which is a play on words in Hebrew, and it means to be drawn out of the waters. Well, this story is important because Moses would later grow up to be not just a prince of Egypt, but the liberator of his people, the Hebrews. And the Nile River would play a key role in all of that. But the lesson for us today is not just about Moses and his miraculous preservation by a group of women who conspired against the king, the midwives, Moses' mother, Moses' sister, Miriam, and indeed Pharaoh's daughter herself, who didn't ask and didn't want to know whether or not this child was an immigrant, but probably knew so. The Bible is a pretty remarkable book because even though it was completed nearly 2,000 years ago, and parts of it are hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so years older than that, and they contain stories that are even older than the written record, The Bible has lessons that are for us today, and indeed for anyone in any culture at any time. In this particular story, we have immigrants, and we have fear of them. We have oppression by a dominant culture. We have enslavement and the effects of that enslavement and how it corrodes trust throughout the society. You have people who are given direct orders by their king and they defy them. And you have an attempt at genocide as a result of that fear. Well, what are the lessons for us today? We live in a time of fear of immigrants. We live in a time when 4 centuries of unpaid bills are coming due. Bills for enslavement and oppression after the ostensible freedom of the slaves, a deliberate disenfranchising by a political system, and an ongoing war against the male members of a particular racial group. Sound familiar? In his powerful book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi makes the point that we become an anti-racist not simply by being colorblind, but by actively and consciously seeing people as individuals, each one worthy and precious, by consciously being grace-filled and graceful to those who are different than we are. At the Church of the Advocate, every week we remind people to love their neighbors, all their neighbors, and each of their neighbors. Now let's be honest. That's easier said than done. But we can do it. Instead of saying, oh, those evangelicals, or those liberals, or those black people, or the Latinx people, or the gay people, or any other group that we have cobbled together and assigned particular qualities to, we are failing to see them as individuals worthy of human dignity. And in the process, we are forgetting a promise that every baptized Christian has made. And that is to work for justice and peace and to respect the dignity of every human being. That's who we're supposed to be. The time has come for us to be that. Amen.